exciting to me on Times Square. I can't think of a more exciting place to speak about family planning. And the first question is, what has been your experience with family planning choices that you've made?
So I started pretty young, actually. I started when I was still a virgin, when I hadn't initiated my sexual activity. And I chose the contraceptive pill because at the time, my mother, my gynecologist had kind of recommended that. And I used it for a while. And then later on in my late 20s, I decided to come off it, and it blew my mind how much hormones had really changed my sexual life and my life in general. So when I came off the hormones, off the pill, I kind of felt myself more in ways that I hadn't comprehended because I'd never had the comparison.
Nice. And when you say you felt yourself more, it makes me think about pleasure, right? And the fact that sometimes one of the side effects is you can't get an orgasm or it's delayed, and that when you do change your contraception, there is a change as well in your ability to have pleasure in certain ways. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely, yes, 100%. I think that when I came off it and I started to realize my body was changing and kind of waking up, there was a big wake up that had to be controlled. And I think that's part of the process. You begin to understand yourself, you begin to explore, what you want and what you don't like and what you might like and what, how you can communicate about
Absolutely.
that as well. That's so important,
Yeah.
I think. For me, I think the contraceptive pill has a place. It's revolutionized the way that specifically vulva owners and uterus owners can kind of live and coexist in relationship.
And I think it's okay to also be in a different phase in your life where you choose a different method. And I think what you're saying reminds me so much of my own clients and patients that I see, that you don't have to be on one just because that's the first one you were ever introduced to.
Welcome, everyone. In celebration of 2023 World Contraception Day, we are delighted to welcome you to a continuation of our discussion, Let Them Know, Advancing AYSRHR Goals Through Youth-Led Partnerships and Collaborations. My name is Jordan Freeman from the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I will be hosting this session on behalf of the Gates Institute and the Global Roadmap for Action. We are excited to have you here and to be celebrating World Contraception Day with us. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a quick logistic note. Live French interpretation is provided for this webinar. If you need French interpretation, please select the French language button at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. We have an exciting agenda packed for this webinar. We will start by screening a conversation featuring the Global Roadmap for Action, FP 2030, and UNFPA, where we will dive into the vital role of youth-led initiatives and partnerships in advancing adolescents and youth sexual and reproductive health and rights. In this conversation, you will learn more about the Global Roadmap for Action and their youth-led movement, as well as the partners that are joining them in this movement to prioritize and advance adolescents and youth in their sexual and reproductive health and rights. Following that insightful conversation, we will transition into a live discussion with the Global Roadmap for Action and some of their members, and the Girl Innovation Research and Learning Center from Population Council will also be joining us for this live discussion, so we are super excited. Our goal today is to explore, inspire, and to commit to making a difference in the lives of adolescents and youth, especially in relation to their sexual and reproductive health and rights and justice. Please feel free to engage in this discussion through the chat feature and the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll do our best to address your questions, but we really want this to be an open discussion where we can talk about partnerships, we can talk about collaborations, and we talk about advancing AYSRHR together. Now, without further ado, let us get started with the conversation to kick off this event, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am super excited, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to this space for our discussion, Let Them Know, Advancing Adolescent and Youth Sexual and Reproductive Health Through Youth-Led Partnerships and Collaboration. My name is Jordan Freeman. I am a program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And I will be your moderator for today for what I hope is an insightful and impactful and action-oriented conversation. As the host of today's conversation as Gates Institute, we are delighted to invite you here. We are partnering with the Global Roadmap for Action through one of our global programs and our new strategy that goes through 2030. Through this new strategy, we are interested in cultivating the next generation of family planning leaders through mentorship, through training, and through networking opportunities. And so that's what we hope to achieve here today. As we gather here today, we've come with a shared commitment and purpose to highlight the challenges and issues facing adolescents and youth in family planning and sexual reproductive health around the world. But this is not just a conversation, this is a call to action. It's a call to action that comes to place at a time where we are reevaluating and looking at our global efforts to advancing adolescents and youth sexual reproductive health, especially as we're looking at our 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and benchmarks. And one of the groups leading this call to action is the AYSRHR Global Roadmap for Action, which I am super excited to have here today. This is a growing global coalition of youth-led organizations that are driving a youth-led and youth-designed vision for their sexual and reproductive health. So I invite you all to ask questions and engage in this conversation. As we engage in this conversation, I ask that you come with an open mind, a collaborative spirit, and a commitment to action. Action-oriented, that's going to be the whole theme for today. Although I am your moderator, this is an open space for discussion. I encourage you to ask each other questions, to challenge each other, and to seek collaboration and solutions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce everyone that's here today. Starting with my right, I have Dr. Jacqueline Fonquo, who is a member of the Global Roadmap for Action and also an AYSRHR consultant with FP 2030. I have Dr. Samu Kleso Dubé, the Executive Director for FP 2030. I have Innocent Grant, who is also a member of the Roadmap for Action, as well as the Program Director for Young and Alive based in Tanzania. I have Danielle Engel, the Technical Specialist and Team Lead for Adolescents and Youth at UNFPA. I have David Mbago, Dr. David Mbago, I apologize, who is the Director for Youth Hub. And then I have Dr. Norhan Bader, who is a member of the core leadership team at the Global Roadmap for Action and has been through it the entire time, pushing this vision forward. So with that said, I'm going to kick off our conversation. And so my first question that I want to ask to all of us and kind of set the stage, get us warmed up and talking, is what brings you to this conversation and what do you hope to get out of this conversation? So lucky you, Jackie. You were to my right, so I am going to start with you.
Thank you, Jordan. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited for this discussion because many a times we find ourselves seated, we are attending and participating in discussions and panels, and we are not really moving from discussions to actions. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited that this particular discussion is not just about dialogue, but it's dialogue that is leading to action. And how did I find myself in this space? I think in 2017, when I graduated from med school, I was practicing in a clinical setting in a small community that was plagued by a humanitarian crisis. And while I was in the hospital setting, I saw that it was becoming more common to find a teenager, 15-year-old young lady who moves into the health facility and is seeking for care, maybe from an incomplete abortion with her life at stake, or a young girl of 16 years old who comes to the clinic and is presenting with signs of an emergency because maybe they attempted an abortion with the wrong people in their neighborhoods, and she's coming and she's presenting with a grave complication because she has been bleeding excessively. And so I started asking myself, well, what is going on? Because through my medical training, I was really not exposed to what happens at a community level that impacts people's health, especially the health of young girls. And so I realized that the time at which they are coming, there's very little that I could do. And so we started doing some activities within the community to find out what was happening, who was perpetuating this, and why are young girls more and more vulnerable. And so one thing led to the other. I saw the reason to do more in the community, and so eventually transitioned out into public health practice. And I'm really looking forward to today to see how do we connect the different things that are happening in small communities across the globe, because our problems are becoming common, right? What was happening in my small community where I was when we look at what's happening in Ukraine now, they're identical. And so though communities are unique in themselves, but their problems are similar. And when I started participating in global conferences and discussing with youth leaders, I could realize that we have solutions to bring, but we are disconnected. And so I'm excited because the opportunity of what the GRA wants to do is to connect to this organization. I'm looking forward to, now that the platform has already been set, what is it that we can do? And today, being at UNGA 78, which is a very pivotal time, and we're looking at being midway into the SDGs, what can we do differently so that by the time we arrive in 2030, we are celebrating that we have done it despite the challenges. So excited and looking forward to the action that we are going to be taking from today going forward.
Okay, thank you. It's a hard act to follow. All right. Dr. Samu. I know, I'm sorry.
So I am here because we're leading an organization, FP 2030, and collaborating with Johns Hopkins Institute. We know that we are solving not just common problems, Jackie, but complex problems. And complex problems require that we collaborate and we become not only inclusive, but we become intentional and deliberate around who is around the room and who is on the table. I believe that we ought to, because we haven't done this in the past, I believe that when something is not being solved, right, you need to question yourself, like who else could come in with a fresher perspective, with maybe some agility, some pragmatism, and I believe that young people are the key to that. You know, Jordan, when we started way back, I think around 2010, McKinsey released a report that was Lions on the Move. You know, it was about Africa, I was walking tall for the Africa we wanted. I was like, these are not only frontier markets, now we're talking about emerging markets. We were hopeful, we wanted to do more. But you know what we did? We left the youth behind and we didn't achieve much. I know and we are convinced within FP 2030 and in my heart that we cannot get to the future that we want, whether it's around SDGs, whether it's around Africa 2063, whether it's about the agenda that is FP 2030, we've just refreshed our strategy. And there is a pillar that speaks to youth. It's about ensuring that young people are not only involved because we like including them, and they are not only beneficiaries, but they are leading in terms of the solutions to these complex problems. Just a week ago, I was counting this year, I've had like close nieces, nephews, etc., who just, their lives suddenly take a certain turn because they don't have access to sexual and reproductive health. And this is also personal because I'm like, we are throwing away young people's futures because of restrictive policies, because we just choose not to include them, because we think that we know better than them. Instead of bringing them in the room and around the table, we are saying that we know better than them. This is the time. And I'm just grateful for GRA for creating this platform, because this is a platform for action. So I'm looking forward to deliberations today to say what is that action.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, it's my time. Looks like I had to follow the conversation as well. I think to me, it's for so many years there have been a number of guidelines and strategies to solve complex challenges, as Dr. Sam said, complex sexual and reproductive health challenges which are going on in different contexts. And then for somehow these guidelines, these strategies, these programs are not delivering what we actually expect them to see. So we see still there is a continuity of complex problems. When I was in Tanzania this year at home, and then the Minister of Health was announcing the new rates of teenage pregnancy in the country, I was like, looks like we are going back. We are not doing any progress, despite the hard work that we've been doing. And like, maybe we are not doing anything good. So I think this is a platform that now brings together us young people who are doing, programs in the communities, and FP 2030 and UNFPA from the global levels to co-create together and see how can we create responsive solutions. So I think what brings me here is because I see this as a safe space and a brave space to start thinking about what went wrong and how do we improve it and start doing actions. So I'm actually looking forward to that. As you say, it's an action-oriented conversation. I think it's going to be a really strong way to start kicking afresh and improve the programs we do. So that's it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, well, it's my privilege to represent UNFPA, the Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency of the UN. But apart from being the Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, we are also one of the agencies which really looks towards young people. We really want to be a place where young people can come, and we have. I just talked to my colleague here that this morning, during this IMGA, we are hosting the Youth Plus in UNFPA. So all young people coming together, come to our premises, and that's really what we want to see. We are also, I'm working at the technical division in UNFPA, and we are the ones who contribute and help develop these guidelines, which you're talking about. And and we very much would like these guidelines to be informed by the lived realities of young people. So that's why in all our country offices, in all our regional offices, in the headquarters here, we are in a constant exchange with young people to make sure that what is in these guidelines and what we recommend to countries actually is informed by the realities of young people and is co-designed. And I hope that this space, and that's why we are so very comfortable here, is a great space to co-design, to think about how can we move advanced AYSRH, the SRH for young people. I hope that it's not as bleak as you say. I hope we come to some of the points where we see that we have done a lot of have seen a lot of advances in SRHR for young people. Some indicators are going to the right direction, so we should not lose hope and not lose the energy to move forward. But again, as I said before, we would really like very much to do this with and for young people and create a coalition together with you to advance the goals of the ICPD, which is SRHR for everyone.
Thank you. Debbie?
First, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I am very, very honored to be with colleagues that I've known for a while now, and also be with leading agencies in the field of the family planning and SRHR. I think that is fantastic, and also with the Johns Hopkins Institute for coordinating this and leading this as well, co-leading this as well. From my side, I think at the Yale Hub, we are very interested in the topic of youth participation in the field of AYSRHR, of adolescent and youth SRHR. So the GRA, for example, has a major component on meaningful youth engagement. So for us, when we realized that there was this connection and this opportunity, we said, yes, this seems like a good chance to get the message out of why this matters, but not only why this matters as a message, because we have many advocacy platforms already. We have had consensus statements launched already, but something that was more practical, that had like concrete steps that we could follow, not only as youth organizations, but also as implementers, as funders, as researchers, as everyone who is involved in the field. Because from our side, what we have noticed is that just working in silos doesn't work at all. So as you were saying before, co-creation matters and is very, very important. What we say at the Yale Hub is collaborative action learning. So it means that all of us get together in one space to learn together what is working, what is not working, and get perspectives from each other, right? Because we know what, for example, the funder knows how financing is done in general, where the funds are coming from, then the implementers know what is needed, then the researchers know the measurement of each of these things. So we all have to get together into this, like roll out of sleeves and get beyond this just advocacy asks and these, like demands in general, because we all have demands. We all love to make these sort of, like position papers, requests, high-level things, which is fantastic, and I'm not saying that they are not necessary, but I think that we need to go beyond that into actually working and saying, okay, this needs to be done now, because in the end, like we're saying, there's been some backlash, in general when it comes to rights. There's been decreases when it comes to achievements that we had in the past. So I think that is a major red flag that we need to take a look and just get together and start working from now on.
Thank you. Nurhan?
I'm excited, first of all, to be here. Like, it's really amazing to see how the GRA moves around the 2 years from just being an idea and then collecting more young youth-led organization, coming together, presenting it at the ICFP, and being here also to have more discussion about it and making more a live document and more partnership. You brought me in a very reflective mood, Jackie. I think now about the 16 years old me trying to do something for my community, and then I came across women trying to have a birth while she have an HIV. And from there, I felt at some point trying to be alone, trying to solve a problem by myself, very complex problem. I didn't understand system, I didn't understand anything around what's happening around me. I just wanted to help. And it's really amazing when I be in a global events and conference, and I felt like I'm not alone. There is a lot of millions and billions of young people that they want to help and support, coming from a country that is around now 100 million, 60% of us are young people, seeing what's happening in Egypt back in 2011 revolution, and how also we are frustrated and we want to change the situation, very complex situation. We have a lot of energy, ambitious, but I feel also how the youth movement sometimes is fragmented and sometimes it's really hard to be organized. Like, I'm amazed that the Global Roadmap of Action have 40 youth-led organization, and I know how it's really hard to have a youth-led organization in any of our own countries. The registration process, the opening a bank, there is no kind of mentorship, funding issues. It's a lot of hectic work. So I'm excited to be able to have this moment where all of us came in a solidarity, trying to see what's the future. And I agree with you with the right movement coming into rise. I guess if we are not organized to be a strong opposition of what's happening now, it's going to be, I don't want to imagine it. Like, I'm imagining the optimistic part of it. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to more action, more also commitment to the JRA, to all youth-led organizations that been there, and they're also members and all the community that they work in.
Wonderful, thank you. So what I'm hearing is action-oriented, which I love to hear. I'm also hearing interest in collaboration, which is why we're all here, but also urgency. There's an urgency to come together and to find the solutions together, which I love. So we talked a little bit, and people have touched on these complex problems and challenges. Let's name them. What are these complex challenges that we're facing in terms of advancing AYSRHR, especially when it comes to partnering and working with and engaging with youth-led organizations or youth in general? So I'm going to open that to the floor if anyone wants to take it first. Otherwise, I'll call on someone.
I can start.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think it was in 2019 that the YIELD project report was launched, when it was a research that documented most of the issues that young people face when they try to engage in the field of SRHR. And the way that the report divided the issues were in 5 main categories. So first is finding the youth who is leading right now the SRHR field. So to explain this a bit is that often the same people are the ones who are representing the different initiatives. The young people who are involved in the field of SRHR often come from privileged backgrounds, for example, capital, speaking second language as English, for example, and I am including myself in there. I am pretty much aware of my privilege and I acknowledge them all the time, but it's an issue. It's an issue that we're trying to change right now, for example. The second one is equipment. So this is linked to capacity building, for example, allowing the young people to have the resources that they need when it comes to knowledge, skills that they can develop in the time that they are involved in the field of SRHR. Then it comes to enable, which is making room. You know, we always talk about the chairs, the table, bring the folding table. Yeah, it's a lot of examples that I can give. But it's also like the adults who, for lack of a better term, because I always struggle with that youth adult. I mean, I'm an adult. We're all adults since we're 18. But also for them to make room and make the space that is, you know, like very much not hostile or like even unsafe, for example, for young people to engage. And then connecting, because what happens after you turn 24, 30, 35, 40, whatever the definition of youth is. So it's also about thinking about this next step. You know, are you joining the workforce? Or are you moving to something different? What are we doing with you to stay involved in the field? Because otherwise you're just losing people with fantastic, you know, knowledge, skills, who have been trained for several years. And then finally, tracking, which is the measurement aspect of this, because we all have our youth initiatives, we all have frameworks that we want to develop, but there's lack of harmony when it comes to measuring and tracking and all these indicators. I think that we need to make the case of youth participation, but we need to make this together as well. So we have a united case, investment case when it comes to youth partnership, instead of fragmenting, like Norha mentioned, that the field is still fragmented. So I can stop for now, yeah.
Wonderful. Anyone want to add, build?
Perhaps I can just say, from our perspective, I mean, if you look at challenges, you just have to look at the data, unfortunately. I mean, 21 million births happen every year in adolescence. 10 million of those are mostly unintended, and we have over 5 million abortion in adolescents every year. So that's, of course, a huge red flag and a reason for concern. And although we see that there is increased commitment on the policy level for AYSRH, for adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights, we still see often a gap between the policy intent and what actually programs are delivering for adolescents on the ground. And there it comes, we're involving young people here at the global level, even at the country level, at the national level. But then when young people come to a service provider, they're still not being treated the way they should be. There was still a lot of stigma, which young people and structural issues which they have to overcome. So, additionally, I think you mentioned it, David. We see this rollback of some of the gains which we have seen in the last decades on gender equality, on rights. And AYSRH is, I think, particularly sensitive because adolescent sexuality is a contested field more or less everywhere in the world. So we still have to overcome these barriers for young people. So that's what I would highlight as the main challenges we see for the moment.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other
Could I just build on the issue of data? Because we want data, now we have moved from, is it data informed, like data driven, right? Data driven decision making that is localized. I think we still don't have that. Often we get the macro picture, and the data that usually is useful is what happens in Tanzania, what happens in Cameroon, and that data actually could, if you put it in front of policy and decision makers, often they act when they see data. So how we collect data when some of the family planning modules actually exclude adolescents is a problem. And that points to the point that you made earlier around restrictive policies, and we are sort of almost not as organized as the opposition, because we can't name this problem, we can't put it on the table, then we can't solve it. But the opposition, which has been working for the past 50 years to get where they are now, they named whatever they wanted to change, and they are consistently like nibbling at that issue. I think, and again, I'm not in a solutions mode, but because we have not characterized this problem clearly and succinctly, we can't solve it. We just react to, can you believe they did this? Can you believe they did this? And that, for me, remains a challenge. You mentioned the organizational issues around funding, etc., that actually become a problem. And part of it stems from the inability to do cross-collaboration between youth in education, youth in climate change, youth in other areas. So we become like fragmented, and it becomes a challenge. So again, we may need to reorganize our agenda around and cross-collaborate so that we can access sustainable and maybe predictable funding, because the challenge is that it just comes in pieces and dribs. And I'm hoping GRA could help us even just move that needle a bit.
You said you weren't in a solutions mode, but that sounded like a solution.
Well, I'm happy to chime in. I hesitated. I wanted others to take the lead because I wanted to come from a different angle, which is that of what I find to be a great challenge we're facing now is that we have been identifying this problem of how we are lagging behind, how we are delivering for young people. And what I feel that organizations are doing now is that they are getting better at communicating and learning the language. What is the language that you can use in the global scene that can make you to fit in? What is it that you can put on your website that people can look and say, oh, this organization is delivering for young people? And so it seems we are becoming experts at using the right word. Oh, we've moved from youth participation, we've gone to meaningful youth engagement. Now we're talking about youth partnerships, and everyone is learning what's the language because we don't want to be called out. And so you have global organizations that are solving youth problems from the fact of that they want their reputation to be maintained. They don't want to be called out because there's that risk that if young people come after an organization, that maybe it can go a long way to affect how they are seen globally. And we know that has happened to some organizations. But that is problematic. If we are seeing dealing with young people like we want to do it because we don't want to be called out, and we are learning the language and we're showing up and we're saying these things and we don't mean them, and it's still the same struggle. You still have to convince people a lot and still have to present that, okay, maybe this is what is needed. So I feel that one of the great challenges that we are facing now is that we've spoken a lot about these problems, and now we are just learning the language, what is best to say during what occasion, and we will really have to sit down and ask, when an organization makes a commitment to deliver for young people, do they mean it? And how can we tell whether they mean it or they are just bluffing? So I find that to be a big challenge, and I want to stop at that for now.
Okay, that sounds like accountability. It sounds similar, thread between you and Danielle's statements. It sounds like accountability for doing what you actually said you were going to do. And so how do we develop that? It's a question I'll leave in the air for now, but Innocent, go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to think on how to put this challenge out there, because I think most of the sexual and reproductive health challenges are quite known. So teenage pregnancy, high rates of HIV/AIDS transmission. But also I was trying to think of the challenges on how we approach these problems. And I think one of the big challenges that I see now is we implementers, global partners, local partners, we are continuously start to lose trust in the communities we work with. And I think this loss of trust is not just being created by us, but it's also how those global anti-rights movements have been coming up into disrupting that kind of trust that we've been working to build with the communities. And I think that loss of trust is making even the work that we do sometimes to be tough to do and not to be taken by the communities that we work with. I think the big challenge is now is what are the trust building platforms that we're going to use? What are the trust building pathways that we're going to use to make sure that the approach we co-create with the communities are actually working and actually taken by the communities and being implemented. So maybe somewhere else, somehow we lost that. Maybe we didn't work with religious leaders. Maybe we didn't work with some other groups that are actually helping in building those trust within the communities. So one thing I learned, for instance, this year in my country, there was quite a big anti-organizations movement, if that's how we call it. So any organization working on sexual and reproductive health, an organization working on HIV/AIDS response, we're being seen as threats. We're being seen as going against Tanzanian values and cultures. But for instance, in the communities we worked with, was the trust that we built between our organizations and the communities that helped to say, no, we know Young and Alive, they're doing this work and we love the work that they're doing. So how do we keep on amplifying that trust for the communities to say, we know these colleagues, we have been co-creating these solutions together and it's actually working. So yeah, I think that's one of the challenges I see. We are losing trust with the communities, we are losing trust with the governments. Nowadays, if I'm to implement a program in my communities, I have to go through millions of approvals before starting an actual work, and it's just delaying the interventions, it's delaying everything. And those people who are working against us, they really know us and they know how to manipulate communities in terms of denying what's right that we are doing in the communities. So yeah, maybe as we move forward, let's challenge ourselves and see what are the trust building mechanisms to maintain the trust of the communities, to maintain the impact that we are doing in the communities, and see the communities keep taking the work that we are doing as solutions, and to see it actually working. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So conversation is action oriented, so I'm not going to keep us in the challenges too long. But we've named some of these challenges. We've started to put them on the table. Let's identify and be transparent with what they are. So my question to you all now is, what are some of the opportunities? What are the achievements and opportunities that you've seen through your organization and your work in AYSRHR that we can leverage and build upon, and let's kind of co-create some of these solutions together?
Can I just build on what
please,
Innocent
yes,
was saying? Because I like the issue of trust. And for me, I am seeing an increase in part of the reason why I almost came late here. I saw, the Burmese people were demonstrating around, against the government, etc. I think all over the world, there is this shrinking of the democratic space overall. So it's not just SRHR, it's just like the democratic spaces. And maybe what we need to do is to be aware that, closing, the issue of rights, SRHR is perhaps even a proxy of what is happening in the broader democratic spaces from the countries where we live. Because you see that that's not spared. So they will close organizations that are working on SRHR, then next, and then we think we are safe. First they will start maybe with LGBTQI, then they will go to family planning, then they will go to HIV, then they will go to gender issues, then they will go. It's always like nibbling into these democratic spaces of anything, and then they retain power. We know fully well that this is becoming a very complex problem, and that's why I believe one of the things that we should do as organizations is cross-collaboration. We can't just live in a bubble. Like we need to understand what's happening within PEPFAR right now. We need to understand what's happening in good governance circles, because when there's good governance, you actually make sure that rights are exercised. What is happening even in other parts of the world, we can not stay in a bubble and stay naive. That's one thing that I think we should be doing. So organizations also need to be deliberate. Jackie is talking about not window dressing. Jackie took me through the ladder. What do you call the ladder? Which is the ladder of participation. Now I've learned that. We are trying to get to number 8. I don't know, the stage 8 of that ladder. So that it's not just like participation, it's leadership. And youth are not seen as beneficiaries. They are seen, they actually co-create, they lead and say, this is a challenge that we are going to solve. So now increasingly organizations need to be measured, and we need accountability mechanisms, including even FP 2030. Yes, we have put them in our governing board. Yes, they were part of the transition of oversight committees, etc. Yes, we've got focal points in structures in countries. Yes, maybe we do give them a stipend here and there, but is that enough? Perhaps not, and we need those accountability mechanisms and name each other and call each other out when things are not going well. Otherwise, we too are closing that democratic space around sexual health and reproductive rights.
Oh, I'm sorry, you had something to add. I saw some snaps on that side of the room. Lovely. Did you have something to add?
No, I wanted to go to the achievements and moving us to a little bit of a more positive, forward-looking perspective on adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights, even though I fully subscribe to your analysis of trust. And actually this morning at the UN we had a whole session with young people where the first session was about trust and intergenerational partnership, and what does that look like in the very complex world we are living in. But pivoting back to what are the advancements we have seen in AYSRH, I would like, if you allow me, as we're at the brink of celebrating the ICFP at 30, just looking back at the International Conference on Population Development, which has really been pivotal, I would say, to put adolescent SRHR on the map. That was quite, forward-looking, quite, progressive for its time, like 30 years ago. So I think we can look back and say, well, we have come quite a long way. Again, if we look at the indicators, we have seen, improvements in indicators for adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights, including improved maternal health, a drop in adolescent fertility rates, a drop in child marriage, even though it's still very prevalent. But if we look at the trends, they do go into the right direction. And also an increase for demand of contraceptives. And again, we are not there yet, but if we're looking at the trends, they're going to the right direction. The question is, how can we accelerate that progress? And then we also see some really encouraging signs in some countries who have been able to push multi-sectoral programs to reduce teenage pregnancies, thinking about Chile, Uruguay, an excellent example, all from your region, but also Ethiopia, or even a country like England, who was really able to, in a short period of time, to move the needle. And that shows that we know what works. We know how we can work together. If we push multi-sectoral approaches, if we take young people on the journey, we will be able to really make real progress, which will have an impact in young people's lives. So I'm quite hopeful that if we all bundle together, we really can make a big difference.
Thank you. Other opportunities that you all see based on the challenges we've discussed and based on your own experience and work?
I can say that the GRA is an opportunity. Yeah, it's an opportunity because if we are saying that there is a lot of fragmentation between youth-led organizations, so 41 or 40 more than youth-led organizations were able to cross over the 2 years, trying a lot of consultation, thematic consultation, regional consultation, survey filling and writing and rewriting. And away from the section that related to the barrier, we were able to name the priorities. And it's really important when we name the priorities that we want to work with. Everyone in their own country, whatever it was on a community level, global level, can use the document and try to work around the priorities. And the priorities is the other way of all barriers that we're mentioning. Like one of the priorities, acknowledging how young people and youth are a diverse group, and solutions does not mean has to be very specific for the context, for the diversity of identities and the needs that young people need. And then also, because also there is a huge need for the progressive SRHR and justice policies, given that they're also turning out of those policies and having every now and then some laws or some policies that do an opposite of the old success and the steps that we take more forward. And then also the financing, it was a huge issue. Youth-led organization need this also trust to be able to be financed. And I agree with you, Adolescent. It's not only like I feel like we lost also some of those trust because donors sometimes driven certain themes that we have to deliver to our community, and they don't perceive it as an issue. So it's like, why you are talking me about 1, 2, 3 while I need, for example, economic empowerment. So also donors have to listen, also not only financing, but also listen what are the needs in those community to be able to fund it. And again, yes, of course, meaningful use participation. And the last one is about data and transparent data, accessible data, the language of data, who own it, who produce it also sometimes is a little bit critical, and also a huge part relating to monitoring and evaluation and accountabilities, because also we need to know what are the success and what are the failures to be able to learn from this. So those were the 5 priorities that we were able to come across, and I guess also we came with 3 pathways. I guess Innocent can explore more about also the pathways that we created. We're trying to also be organized in advocacy for the 3 pathways that we created.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Nora. I think the GRA is one of the big opportunity as we are starting moving forward these conversations, and also just building on the pathways, the partnership pathways with the GRA. So we've got 3 partnership pathways. The first one is about power shifting, and if I'm to explain it in a simple way, I think it's about moving the language from this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what we want, but it's moving from that language to how can we co-create what is being wanted together. So that's about power shifting and acknowledging the power that young people are having and being able to work together in co-creating solutions. It's what we've already been talking about. So it's already in the GRA. The second pathway is about youth leadership. So as we are moving forward to solve these complex sexual and reproductive health challenges, but also acknowledging the progress that we've been able to make. But it's also understanding that the work that we do is about changing people's hearts and minds. And changing people's hearts and minds needs a lot of leadership within it. And young people are the leaders to do this. And the GRA gives an opportunity for us to recognize that, we have leaders, and let's go and acknowledge their leadership potential and actually being able to mentor them to become good leaders and do and bring change within their own communities. And the last pathway is about accountability. So 40 youth-led organizations also understand the power and the importance of having more transparency and how do we make leaders accountable in terms of the results that we want to achieve. And this is actually already been taken into action. Whenever I speak about these pathways, I normally tend to reflect on what maybe has been done in Tanzania. So for instance, I want to acknowledge young leaders in Makete district of Tanzania who are doing intergenerational community dialogues to challenge perceptions, norms of what is hindering their access to sexual and reproductive health information, family planning services within the healthcare centers in Tanzania. They're already doing it themselves within their own communities, identifying the challenges and speaking to the local leaders about how do we change these complex challenges which are happening, acknowledging a group of young mothers in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, who are working to empower each other, talking to each other, what are the needs that we have, you know. I remember when we went to this group of young mothers, like, okay, we want to solve sexual and reproductive health challenge, we want to know your challenge, but they're like, no, these are not maybe our challenges, we want money first, we want food first. And they working by their own selves to identify these issues and co-creating solutions to resolve them. So the GRA is already in action. I think it's now time to take these partnership pathways, working together and see how do we implement them together. I see that's already an opportunity. How do we maintain that group of young mothers in Dar es Salaam? How do we maintain that group of adolescent girls and young women and girls and adolescent boys and men in Makete district who are actually leading community dialogues to change perceptions? They already have trust, you know, they're doing some stuff in the community which are actually promising. So how do we move forward with that collectively?
Jordan, can I chime in? Just again, building on this conversation around linkages with other sectors, but this is not just a sector. It's like, what is it that a young person wants? Because what we're trying to do here is to program hope, right? The hope for a better future, hope, you know, that when I want to have children, I will be able to decide, hope for a job at times, hope for better education and advancement. So linking that is important. And I am seeing there are many initiatives that are trying to bridge the divide, perhaps it's a false dichotomy between sexual reproductive health and economic empowerment and education, etc. So the more we link up, what we are doing with opportunities for youth around economic power for young people, that for me would actually be a win. And let's do that creatively. We trust youth, and we do hope that they will help us move the dial around funding for young people. I already like what is happening within Johns Hopkins and TCI, around working with sub-national governments to sort of scale some of these high-impact practices, of which some of it is about working with young people. So if we actually accelerate that, that would really be great. Young people should know where money is. Somehow I was schooled to believe that there's so much money in the world. But it's chasing problems that are not necessarily the problems, right? We need to just direct the money to where the challenges are so that, youth have got access to that money. We're smart enough to actually do that. Get private capital, get private sector to work with you so that they have access to these opportunities. And lastly, we are launching as FP 2030, we called it previously a rapid response mechanism, but a small grants mechanisms that actually would target advocacy, would work with young people to make sure that they've got resources to win at a local level, at a community level. So all these initiatives, let's map them and let's link up our youth with these opportunities to win.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so we're talking about opportunities, and I heard a lot about working together, also being action-oriented, co-creating together. And for example, at the Yield Hub, that's exactly what we're proposing through the collaborative action learning groups model. So it is a model where, like I said before, we need to get together all the stakeholders, for example, funders, implementers, advocates, researchers, implementers, innovators, everyone who can get their input into a specific problem that we propose for solution. So for example, what we do at the Yale Hub is facilitate the process. So we ask them, the group, which is a commitment first because it's a long process. For example, epi-23 is part of our action learning group actually. So it's actually to roll up your sleeves and say, we're going to get to work. On top of all the work that we already have, we're going to do something else. We're going to challenge ourselves to find a solution for our organization, which is a small problem, big problem, but it's a problem that we need to solve when it comes to youth participation in the field of SRHR. And we only facilitate the process. We only structure the meetings in a way that is reflective. You have your learning diaries, you have your homework to do because it is like a classroom basically. But it's something that you will need to commit that you will do in 6 months because you will have to find a solution and implement the solution to this problem. So it's action oriented as much as possible in this case because you will be accountable for yourself because we are not a global thing, we're not the UN, we are not a government. We'll not be checking your grades, but you will know if you did your homework or you didn't do your homework. So for example, like you were saying before, I don't know, if epi-23 doesn't know how to compensate young people beyond stipends, for example, someone in the group might have a solution, might have an idea that can be proposed, but you know how epi-23 works. So you know if it will be feasible or not feasible to implement this. And I think this applies also to other issues in SRHR. For example, when it comes to data, when it comes to service provision, each of us know what works in our organization, our clinic, our hospital, our institute. So there are toolkits out there. There are several toolkits out there. Probably there are hundreds being created right now as we speak. But in the end, it's a matter of you taking that toolkit and saying, okay, I'm going to apply this for a problem that is happening in my organization, and I'm going to do something about it. So I think that from our side, that's what we're proposing, and we're very happy that we have as much as local organization involved, but also big organizations like epi-23, like Plan International, Engender Health, big ones who are interested in these topics and are ready to make changes.
Thank you. Anything else anyone want to add around or build or make connections for some of the opportunities we've talked about?
Perhaps what I can say is I've been working in adolescent SRHR now for the last 20 years. And I have to say, I think it's undeniable that in the last couple of years there have been increased attention at the global and even also at the national level, depending on the countries, on SRHR for adolescents. And that led to a couple of FP 2020 as a good example, Girls Not Brides pushing for ending child marriage, all these partnerships which are really the African Coalition on Menstrual Health, for instance. All those coalitions are really putting AYSRH on the table. So, and that creates a lot of opportunity to speak about the issues, to advocate, but also to guide governments and implementation. The second point which I would like to say is policies and legal frameworks which are changing. So we see that, again, child marriage is a good example. FGM is another example where we see increasingly countries taking this up and putting legal frameworks in place which are protecting young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights. And again, guidelines. A couple of years back, WHO came out for the first time with guidelines on adolescent health, requested by the World Health Assembly. So, and that of course creates, it's not a panacea, and I agree with you to your earlier point, but it does create an opportunity to work with governments, have agencies like ours guide, advise governments to increase their focus on adolescents and youth SRHR. And then my last point is youth participation. You are here as the Global Roadmap for Action, a good example of what, the fact that we're having this discussion here at the UNGA. And by the way, it's not the only one, and David knows that, this week, where we talk about SRHR of adolescents. So that itself creates a huge opportunity to get your voices heard, have a platform where leaders will listen, and where we can table these issues, which then hopefully will have a trickle-down effect, so that we can have a sustained change at the country level.
May I say one more thing? Yeah, as much as we talk about opportunities also, I closed my notebook and I also remember the 1.8 billion campaign, because it's a 1.8 young people for change campaign, which reflects on the population that exists right now, which is 1.8 young people in the world. And I think that this is a good framework for us to think that the amount of people who benefit from these adolescent and youth SRHR initiatives that we're talking about, and also who are struggling with the problems that we're also talking about, is huge. And it will be growing in the next few years to a point where I think that more participation matters a lot. And for example, this morning I was also listening to a parliamentarian speaking about the lack of political participation of young people, for example. And when I reflected on this 1.8 billion people not being represented in policy-making spaces, for example, it is like completely unfair in the end. It's like it's lack of justice that we're talking about. So yeah, I was just remembering also that the Global Forum for Adolescents taking place this year. It also has a huge SRHR component because it matters a lot for young people. So yeah, just good to amplify other activities happening.
Thank you.
Jordan, a thing I'm conscious about is inclusivity. As we are doing the 1.8 billion, as we are talking about these guidelines and policies, because often who is excluded? It's these teenage mothers who now have children and they're in underserved areas in Tanzania, in Malawi, etc., in Pakistan, because often we exclude them. Is there a way, since we're data people and we've got UNFPA in the room, so I'm safe. Is there a way of sort of getting some coefficients of inclusion? Because we're almost starting a new, we are accelerating. Here we are putting enzymes and catalysts, right, to say we are not going to achieve some of the targets towards SDGs if we don't do something different. But what are we tracking? Are we tracking those people in the rural areas, you know, the ones where the community is taboo? It's known that the only way you have to just get married at 15 and that's it. And how do we make sure that a country, as they're implementing their guidelines, they measure this? They measure some of the equity, they are measured in how they are successful in addressing some of the inequities of the past. Because I think if we leave that behind, we will leave a whole number of people behind. I'm not even talking about the struggle within the struggle, right? Youth with living with disabilities, you know, the other sexual minorities, etc., in the whole sexual and reproductive health agenda. So could we measure this? I think we've got smart people who could help us. Because when you start measuring it, it starts getting done.
Yep.
Just one word, talking about the opportunities that we see. I think, build on what Danielle said and what both of them have said, is that we are seeing more and more recognition of what youth leadership can do. Mm-hmm. And so we are having more youth-led initiatives that are becoming established organizations, which I think is great. Innocent will bear with me that, will agree with me that when you are working in the context of a youth-led organization, that you're pushed to your extremes to develop a lot of capacity. Mm-hmm. He might be an expert in designing interventions, but at the same time, you need to master how finances work. At the same time, you need to master how to work with people in government to get the authorizations and make sure that you are aligning your programs to what the policy, national policy or district policies say. So what are we doing at the end of the day? If we're having more and more of these youth-led organizations that are established, and we have youth leaders whose capacities, they are building their capacities. These are people who the next 5 years, next 10 years from now, Innocent here is a potential minister of health for his country, or a president for those who have political ambitions. So, and when these are people who will occupy, who will grow and will occupy other senior positions in the country. And if there are people who started working where they could use minimal resources to achieve more. Mm-hmm. So we are thinking about a future where these people will become now decision leaders in their countries, and they are deciding what policy should we go. So when we talk about youth leadership, we are talking about the present, but the future that we desire to see, and these are the right people that we're investing in. And I'm glad that organizations and partners are beginning to see the need to fund the work of young people. It's not a threat, it should not be a competition, it should not just be tokenism, but because of this great opportunity, everybody should be buying and running for this and supporting this. And I'm glad that we are going to be doing that from this discussion.
Yes, that leads me to a good segue. So part of the Roadmap for Action, the tagline is let them know. Let them know what youth expect, what we want, and what we need. So from the Roadmap for Action Youth in the Room, you have FP 2030 and UNFPA. So I'm going to give you the floor to let them know what you want.
And say, come to us, talk to us. UNFPA's strategic plan, which we are implementing right now, has as one objective to support women-led and youth-led organizations. And we realize that the UN is not always the easiest to work with. We have big bureaucracy, etc. But we are changing our policies so that we are more agile in supporting grassroots organizations, particularly youth-led organizations. We understand that there's turnover, people move in and out of the youth space, obviously, and that requires capacity building, etc., and that our audit requirements need to be different when we work with young people. So there is a lot of change happening on that front. That's what I can say, and definitely UNFPA is one of the agencies who is really committed to make this work. So my point is, come talk to us, talk to me, talk to us here at headquarters, talk to our country offices. We really are very eager to support the civil society, the youth-led civil society, women's-led civil society, which often is young women-led. Let's put this also out there. So we're very happy to work with you and build capacities and see how we can increase, also to address your point of the civic space. I think that's a role the UN needs to play as well, where we create the right environment where the civil society can thrive. And for us, UNFPA, it means women's organization and youth organizations. So we're really your ally here. So please talk to us.
Yeah, Daniel, we are really, really excited. This is why we are having this conversation, to have this action. And we want to assure you that the GRA is not an organization that is a threat to established institutions like UNFPA, but it's a partner. It's reaching out, that there's so much that we can do together. And just to let you know that we cherish that, and we want to work and partner with UNFPA, and to let you know that tapping into this moment is a great opportunity to let other partners who are of the same capacity as you, or of different capacities, to know that this is a great thing. It's a great moment that we all should be keen in. It's time for us to do action, and so you're participating. We want to assure you that UNFPA is signing up for something great, for something big, and they are in the right place, doing the right thing with the right people, and that you should be proud of that, because not too long from now, the results will be very evident, and you want to be one of those people. Like, we are the first guys who jumped on the board with these guys, and we are glad with the results that we achieved. So we will be coming, so thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I guess for FP 2030, like, there's two asks that I have in my mind while you were talking, and I guess post points, you already touched on them. One of them, like, I'm a big fan of FP 2030.
We need a commitment from Egypt.
No, yeah.
FP 2030 commitment.
That's why I want youth-led organization to be able to have to be part of the accountability and monitoring. Like, I know that you already have young people in all reference group and all of other, but also, can we have a way of also young youth-led organization in those countries, reflecting also of the report that the country is presenting for FP 2030 as a way of also counter kind of also validation, also from young people, what they are needs for the country that is committed to FP 2030 to be done. I think this one track will be good also to have youth-led organization in those countries be able to reflect to the commitment of their country, the reporting that they do as an accountability track. And I guess you mentioned the small grant mechanism, and I'm wondering how we can make it easy for youth-led organization to apply for this grant. What kind of I don't know, requirement, what are the process to make it easy for youth-led organization to apply to small grant and be able also to participate to the movement that FP 2030 is doing?
Yeah, and what you're talking about, your first point around youth, making sure that youth could participate in accountability, etc., that is on track. And some of the people who are doing the real work include Jackie here, because the commitments that we are seeing, nearly half or more are actually now involving youth, like why we need adolescents and young people in the forefront. We need more. We almost want to make it mandatory, right? That a commitment should have young people, otherwise what are we doing? So that is one. So that is a commitment also to this initiative, to GRA, that we will participate in youth leadership development in the countries that make FP 2030 commitment, where we can, offer, those spaces, ensure that they are involved in accountability. But the interesting thing is that for all the focal point structures at a country level, it's compulsory to have a youth person. So we are doing that. The challenge is that we may not be the ones who are choosing that. I recently came from a country where they were like, I don't understand why FP 2030 it doesn't want this person who we have chosen. She's beautiful. She's pretty. Yeah, I was shocked. But anyway, so we may not necessarily be the ones, setting some of that criteria. Yeah.
That organization can be beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, but she was selected because she's going to be pretty on a global stage. But the second thing around this RRM mechanism, so we are going to officially launch it, and we'll send some of these, and most of the work is going to be done at a regional hub level. As you know, the work that we've been doing over the past year is to decentralize FP 2030's architecture to make sure that it's led at a country, closer to the country. So soon to be announced.
Any other? Yes. Oh. I don't know. Decide who wants to go first.
Yeah, I just want to build on Nora's question to FP 2030. So for instance, I know one of the experience we had recently is the Minister of Health sent like a document for civil society organizations working on family planning to report on the FP commitment, progress and what they're doing. And then later we had a phone call from the National Family Planning Coordinator saying, oh, Young and Alive, amazing. You are the only youth organization who reported, da, 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 da. But again, to ask what is next after that, after celebrating, reporting these commitments, is there any influence that the UNFPA can do with the Ministry of Health in terms of uptaking interventions that they really loved? Because they'll just be, oh, thank you for filling these reports, we love it, but what's next? Yeah. And then the second question is, when are we going to start moving from small grants to big funding and sustainable grants to support these interventions? Especially sometimes I think, so for instance, how can we start getting funding to support strategic visions or strategic plans, not just small projects? Because I think, so working as a program director, one of my experiences, sometimes we just find ourselves working very hard, seeking for funding, and forget a component of what are we supposed to do in the communities, because we are just worried this fund is going to end. When am I going to get another fund? This fund is going to end. When am I going to get another grant? And we find ourselves lost somewhere else there. When are we going to start moving to that? So, as FP 2030, also some youth organizations are having their strategic vision also 2030. How do you go together with these strategic visions? So as at least we, as implementers, and how at least we keep focus to implementing and start moving the focus to just seeking fund all the time. Sometimes it's just too much applications of funding, too much rejections, too much pressure to see this grant is going to end. How can I support? I know the FP 2030 has some, in countries where it has commitment, for instance in Tanzania, it's very influential. Whenever we get into the family planning technical working groups, FP 2030 will be mentioned like maybe 100 times by everyone, So it's very, very influential. How can we influence the Ministry of Health, these family planning technical working groups, to uptake interventions? I mean, sometimes the grants are not there, but how can they uptake and keep supporting interventions? Or how can we get long-term funding as well?
So can I just ask whether the technical working, so when you're talking about the funding, is it for the youth-led organizations, or are you also talking about the technical working groups' capacity to actually implement because they don't have funding, or is it both?
maybe both, but much for the youth trade organizations.
Since we're in this room, right? Since we're in this room. So you are spot on, Innocent, around how, as FP 2030, we could work better. First, to make sure that at a country level, you know, the FP 2030 commitment has got buy-in from several partners. So that's step number one, including, by the way, UNFPA. It is my desire that we shouldn't have disparate things. So the FP 2030 commitment should speak to the ICPD mechanisms so that we speak the same language and we are pushing from and singing from the same hymn book, because otherwise people have got this different reporting and we don't know what is happening. And it's easier when we know that for the family planning component, this is what the country is committed to. This is the costed implementation plan or the FP goals model. This is the youth component that they're trying to implement. And then we are all aware of what's happening at a country level. USAID has been very good in doing that. And it helps their implementing partners, momentum, etc., because they all reference the FP 2030 commitment, because that's what the government, and in many countries, it's usually the president who launches this commitment because they are serious about the family planning agenda. So now, the next step is how do we then move from this commitment making, the reporting mechanism, to accountability? So what you're talking about is accountability. What should happen if you don't meet the targets? Or what happened because when you didn't meet your targets? Is it because of money? Is it because of technical expertise? What exactly? Then we would have more impetus to go back to UNFPA and sit down and lock the room and say we are not leaving until we solve this problem, right? Because that's not happening. You know, when we don't meet our goals, we should be accountable because we help the governments to actually make these goals. So I think we need to graduate and move towards our own accountability mechanisms, working with governments to say, if we didn't achieve this, what should we do if we didn't achieve those plans? I think there are some countries that are doing it better than others. Sierra Leone, for example, UNFPA, after last year, they sent a delegation of 20 experts to solve this problem. Let's solve this challenge that we didn't meet. We need to do that better, Innocent, and getting young people in the room would help us. Funding. Yeah. I think it's a starting point, but we don't want to stay there. We don't want to stay small grants. In 20 years, it's still small grants, right? We hope that when you've got access to these grant-making organization, Innocent Grant, is it grant?
Yeah.
So if we get access to these, yes, exactly his name. We need to then graduate, just like if you are starting a company and you're selling your blazers, right? You get seed funding and then you graduate to mezzanine funding and then you graduate to whatever. Then you come to New York and you list your blazer company on New York Stock Exchange to raise money. So you also would graduate like that. I think we should apply the same thinking, thought process for youth organizations. So the seed funding is for specific issues that will get them to a better place in accessing bigger sums of money. I think we should be intentional about that, and that is important. And lastly, the issue of, there was something that you mentioned around, you will be in the room. I think for me, it's tied to the first response that we need to work better at aligning commitments at a country level, at a global level even, and making sure that, we all sing from the same hymn book as a global community. Then it becomes easier for countries to do that. We'll do that better now that we've got the regional hubs and they are working with the country engagement teams to make sure that alignment occurs. It will be better if we work like that.
Yeah, the topic of funding for youth organizations has been around forever. I mean, since as long as I can recall, there's always a lack of core funding, lack of accessibility for grants, like you were saying, always applying for grants, and also this process has been complex most of the time. And as much as we're looking for commitments from FP 2030 and UNFPA, we can also make a commitment ourselves. For example, in my case as the Yield Hub, I think that I can make the commitment to organize an action learning group where we can come together and discuss how to improve financing for youth, the youth movement. And I would love to invite UNFPA and EP 2030 to this group where we really roll our sleeves and we go through the 6-month commitment to have a concrete plan, design a solution, implement the solution. I will not lock the door until you find the solution, Dr. Sam. It will be an online process, but I would love to invite you, and of course the GRA as well, to be part of this, because we have the four organizations part of this who have great insights into the problem, and also we'll find a solution together, because it's a matter of saying, yes, it's time, it's now or never. Otherwise, it will be 20 years, small grants, seed funding. But here it's a matter of saying, this is the solution that we find. And I'm pretty sure that other funders will be very interested in the topic. And also all other implementers, NGOs, will be interested in this.
And perhaps I can just say that, I started my intervention by reflecting back on the ICPD 1994. When I was a very young person, and many of you were not yet born, I guess. We are now celebrating the 30th anniversary next year. Many of you were with us in Nairobi 4 years ago. And I'm very pleased to announce that we will be having 3 global consultations, and one of them will be with young people. And so that shows also, I think, the commitment of UNFPA for young people, that we really prioritize what young people have to say. I think it's important that the ICT agenda, I went through the whole program of action with my team recently, and it's very extensive. And you think it has only been written yesterday. It talks about all the issues which we are still facing: environmental degradation, migration, AYSRHR, etc. So what we really hope is that the young people community of today comes together and helps us reinvigorate the program for action, which, as I say, we believe is as current as it can be, and just to come together and see how can we work to have new champions for this agenda and move it forward. And I'm very sure that in that global consultation, which will be happening early next year, so stay tuned on that, we will discuss funding and funding for youth organization. How can we make sure that the youth movement around AYSRHR, around the ICPD, is as vibrant as ever, and you can count on UNFPA as your biggest ally, and I would say stay tuned.
So don't forget to invite GRA.
Absolutely not, you're on the list.
Or the GRA could help co-organize.
Yeah.
There you go.
So.
And bring your purse too for funding.
Yes, bring your purse as well. We are almost at time, so any of the last thoughts?
I think if there's something that I want to ask UNFPA.
Not efficient.
Yeah, but one thing I want to throw to the panelists is really around power shifting, because when we're talking about power shifting, we're looking at maybe how money is moving from adult-led organizations to youth-led organizations, but also the culture with which organizations operate and work with young people. We have been talking about youth-led organizations, but Danielle, you did mention how we also see young people move in and out of these organizations. Some of them are absorbed into well-established institutions like yours. What is it, or what do you think your organization can do better to see how these young people who are coming are not seen as people who don't have potential, who don't have expertise, who don't have technical knowledge that they bring, but they can be seen as experts in what they are coming to do, and they are given the room to fully work in the work environment and explore their potentials and go like everyone else in the organization, and not left to certain positions. This is where you are, and this is the benchmark for you. Unless you have 20 years on your CV, you cannot access this and you cannot access that. Yeah, just to find out if there's a commitment that you can make towards that as well.
I'm probably not the best place to make a commitment for the whole organization on young people, even though you have me as an ally inside UNFPA. But I can say that again, I have been in the organization for quite some time, and culture has been shifting. UNFPA at least is putting the what did I say, the money where the mouth is, or some kind of a smile. We have a network of young professionals. We have many young professionals coming from the youth-led organizations whom we have been working. We also see young youth leaders who work with UNFPA being now ministers in some countries. Very encouraging. We're very excited about that. So it's a two-way street, I guess. We have in UNFPA an organization called the Tangerines. They are the smaller, better smelling orange, so younger. So that's the group of young staff members in UNFPA, which are well recognized even at the level of our executive director, and who really are vocal not only, and I think that's important to underline, on youth issues, but on any issues UNFPA is dealing with, including organizational culture and other, because young people have a say, have a vision, have an idea on the world around us. Not just they are not just experts on news. They also should have a say on other areas. So I see there is that trend, and there is certainly a space, at least in UNFPA, for young people to thrive. In my team, we have 8 people. Most of them are very young. They are the ones driving the agenda. So I would say come and join us, and we need you, and we'll be in touch.
So can I add, because I believe that what you are saying, Jackie, is real progress will occur when I believe when we too offer power to solve these real challenges, power, and we are courageous and vulnerable. I'm not Brené Brown, but she loves talking about the vulnerability, because you are saying take a chance and take a risk, because the tradition, the status quo says no, you can't mentor them. They are in almost like a youth corner. There is a glass ceiling for the youth. It's like, unless if you have this experience, you cannot thrive, which is what you are asking us to change. And I think we should commit to ensure that young people within our organizations can lead large portfolios, global portfolios, and they are enabled to do so. Because what that takes is that it will take time from me to actually make sure I work with that young person so that they see the bigger picture, so that they can lead from wherever they are. That takes time, that takes commitment. At times it takes even resources within the organization to do that. And that's what I think, you will help me within FP 2030 to actually do and give away that political capital for young people to actually thrive within an organization, because I know that we are guilty of that. Because I'm like, how youth at times, they've got this nice hairstyle. I'm like, it's the white dreadlocks, right? And whatever. And then they're like, but you can't go to your board meeting like that. But why not? Why can't they, right? It's the change of mindset from the establishment to actually do things differently, see things differently. And again, maybe to conclude, I believe that any problem can be solved with the right people in the room, right people around the table. Let's bring the youth and hear them out and hear their perspectives. Invest in them, allow them to lead. Where they may not lead like you or whatever, it doesn't mean that is wrong. It may mean it's different.
Well, that was a great closing.
Take a chance on me while you're speaking on the edit. Yeah, it's perfect.
Well then, I feel like that wrapped us up really nicely. Well, thank you all. So I've heard an interest in creating accountability mechanisms. I've heard an interest in helping with leadership and capacity building for youth-led organizations as well as non-youth-led organizations. And I've heard of a lot of interest around funding for youth-led organizations. So we have our action learning circles that are going to be happening, and as well as partnerships with UNFPA that we hope to establish to help kind of ease some of those barriers and rethink what youth-led organizations funding looks like. So with that, I'd like to thank you all. I like to remind us to carry this momentum forward. Let this not just be a conversation. We have some tangible action items that we should all be following up on. So let's make sure that we stay on track and we move these conversations to actual action items so they can be actual progress. So with that, I like to close with, again, referencing back to the Let Them Know tagline. So in addition to let them know what we want and what we need and what we expect, today we let them know collectively that we are working together to advance adolescents and youth sexual reproductive health through collaboration, through shared problem solving. And so I thank you all for joining me. And I know we're wrapping up. I think that's it. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed that conversation, and I hope it sparked some questions. I see some stuff in the Q&A already, so I'm excited to get to those, but continue to throw your questions in the Q&A. or your reflections and thoughts and feedback in the chat. And I would love to just open this discussion up for us to chat about what we've heard about. So for this live portion of our webinar, I would like to invite my panelists to join me on camera. So today we have with us Dr. Jacqueline Fonkwell, Innocent Grant, and Dr. David Mbago from the Global Roadmap for Action. And then we are also excited to have Della Nye from the Girls Center with Population Council joining us for this conversation. Welcome, everyone. I think we're all getting our cameras on. Perfect. Okay. So to start us off and get us warmed up on talking again, I like to get everyone's initial reactions or feedback after rewatching or reliving the conversation with FP 2030, UNFPA, and GRA, especially thinking about what are some of your key takeaways that you like to take from that conversation and carry forward as we go into this conversation today. So Jacqueline, you're always to my the first person I see. So I'm going to start with you, if that's okay.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, everyone. It was really great listening, especially what the others had to say, not what I had to say. It was great hearing the points that came out. I think that was a very vital conversation, and it was exciting to see the intentionality and the engagement that UNFPA and FP 2030 are willing to make, the commitments that they are willing to make. And I think that it makes us have hope, and we have a good opportunity with GRA to engage even more partners, to have them commit, because what the GRA wants to accomplish is very clear. The need is there, and the gap that they want to fill is very clear. And I think everybody can see that. So I'm excited to see how we can engage with others and then accompany these organizations that are making these commitments to actually realize the commitments that they are about to make, seeing how we move from this talk and that leads to the action. So yeah, these are the first remarks I will have to make. Handing it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you. I will now go to Innocent.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan and Jacqueline, everyone for staying and watching that really great dialogue. I was texting Jack saying, I'm feeling very shy watching myself, but it was very nice. Yeah, I think to me, my very first reflection that is coming is, so from the discussion that we had, from the dialogue, talking from the challenges that we have described, it's quite complicated challenges. And we all started thinking about some kind of possible solutions to go for these challenges. My reflection is, I see there is so much hope. Just quoting Dr. Sam saying, that's what we have to do, creating hope. And I think the GRA is a new hope in terms of facilitating this kind of partnership together into solving these complicated challenges as we have described. And it's good that the GRA provides what are the priorities, because as long as we have to solve problems, we also have to identify the entry priorities. What are the good priorities to start with? So it gives us the priorities to start with, but also it goes further, as I emphasized, on the pathways. It gives the possible pathways, possible partnership pathways for the GRA on how are we going to solve these complicated challenges, as I mentioned. Also the issue of trust, which we started talking about during the dialogues. I also feel like the GRA provides that opportunities. How are we going to leverage it into building those trust pathways and coming back into solidifying our interventions and innovations that we're doing in our communities? So, and there is a new hope as we go forward into tackling complicated challenges, as we mentioned. And I think the World Contraceptive Day helps us into bringing this hope into discussion and see how can we all work together into achieving meaningful impacts of the work that we do. Maybe that would be my first reflection at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And I definitely want to touch on the aspects of trust and some of those things that we talked about we started to dig into during that conversation. Della, I'm going to come to you. Any reactions as you watched that, or reflections as you watched that conversation?
Yes, but actually, I'd like to start with the first video that I was quite happily jarred when the respondent said, talked about being not sexually active, but being on a contraceptive pill, and then becoming sexually active, and talking about the evolution of that as her, as a person, as a woman. And I thought, oh my God, this is a wonderful conversation to have, and I wish we could have it with more youth for them to understand that it's not a static situation. It grows over time, and it can, you can change your contraceptive method over time. You feel differently. You have different, so I just really enjoyed that portion. With regard to the dialogue, I thought it was very engaging. I thought you brought the right people to the table, right mix of persons and different experiences. And another aspect that really, I was taken aback was the question about what brought you here. Because when I was listening to it, I was thinking, oh, well, everybody's coming in their capacity. But then we started talking about they started talking about themselves as their younger versions. And it reminded me, at 17, the essay I wrote for college was that I just didn't feel heard in a space. I at that time I lived in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia, has the UN Economic Commission for Africa. So we're always going to meetings and being invited, but it felt so like out of body experience, because we as youth were like puppets, or sort of being there, and the real people were talking on our behalf. And I wrote about that in the sense that it was like no one was really asking us. No one wanted to know that we were actually sexually active or not. Like, it was just assumptions were made all over the place. And so I thought, oh, well, that's nice to know that, now we have these kinds of mechanisms like GRA, and, we also have good, allies on our side who want to talk about inclusivity, want to talk about partnering. I really enjoyed the discussion on trust, because I thought this is a very good thing to bring up, because it's multi-level about the trust, and it's two-way. You can't, you build it. But I also enjoyed the conversation about funding, the difficulties, like Innocent mentioned. You're one or two people in the organization who have to do all the work, and that burden is very difficult. You really can't be everywhere at the same time, but yet you have to look for funding. And so I really enjoyed the frankness of those discussions, and those who need to hear it heard it. But also just thinking about how to overcome the challenge. I like to name the challenges and then overcome the challenges. What are the possibilities there? What do these partnerships look like, etc. So it was very engaging, and I really I wasn't expecting that we were going to watch the video for that long, because I thought, oh, okay, but it just kept getting more and more interesting and touching all the right topics. So it was very engaging. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm glad it was engaging, kind of sparked also some personal reflections, but also reflections on the work. So we are going to get to questions in the chat, but it sounds like there's an interest in accountability and in trust. And so during the conversation, Innocent, you mentioned, oh, there's David, actually. Hi, David. Hi. So I'm actually going to go back to that question that I asked everyone else. What were your initial reactions or any feedback or takeaways that you had from engaging in that conversation with FP 2030, UNFPA, and the roadmap?
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry for the delay. Had some technical issues, but yeah, it was great seeing the discussion, the final edit. We had a great time in New York together, and also including Dr. Samu and Danielle from UNFPA and FP 2030. I think that it was a fantastic moment to really recap on what we said, and actually the action points that we had from the meeting, which I think that was the goal, to have something concrete, to have something that was made on commitments from both organizations and also from the GRA as well, of what we can do as youth organizations who are interested in supporting the field, but also supporting organizations themselves to grow when it comes to development of capacity for young professionals, for strategies improvement, and so on. So from my side, I think that those were the highlights. And also, as Innocent was mentioning, being a bit self-conscious about seeing yourself on camera is always happening. But yeah, those from my side.
Agreed. Take some getting used to seeing yourself on camera, but thank you for those. So I have a couple of questions that I want to pose to the group, and then we'll get to some of the Q&A and the conversation that's happening over there. Starting with, so Innocent, you talked about building trust building platforms. And so I'm curious if there are thoughts from the group on how do we go about building those platforms, and what do partnerships look like as we are looking at building trust, especially when it comes to youth and youth-led organizations. So I will leave that for anyone to start, or I'll call on someone if no one starts. All right.
I'm happy to start.
Go for it. Yep.
I want to make sure I've understood the question where we say, how do we go about building these platforms for trust? Yes, I think that was a very pertinent point that came around trust, because this is where a lot happens, or a lot is happening around distrust. And at times there are reasons for that, but at times it's just because of a prevailing problem that has been around for a long time and is not ready to go. And we really have to come together to see how we can change why things are the way they are, and why adults keep seeing initiatives that are led by young people as something that they can't trust. I think that GRA can also work with this to see, why is this issue of trust still an issue? We really need to listen from both sides to have a conversations. Why is there distrust? There could be some examples that have happened in the past that we know. From my subjective experience, I think that, which I did mention in when I was responding to one of the questions, I think youth-led initiatives at times are seen as a potential risk. The ability, or with what we now have social media, and would have instances where when maybe a young person somewhere did not feel, or a group of young people did not feel that they were treated appropriately, and maybe they went to social media or they did things and they really escalated. And now it's possible that well-established organizations see young people or youth-led initiative as a threat. So they come to you just because they don't want to be called out. The question is, it's a good thing, it's part of accountability, because when you're not doing things the right way, you should be called out. But there's also a problem if we are only seen as, if well-established institutions come to youth-led organizations because they don't want to be called out. So because they will continue to see us as a risk. So they are trying to mitigate a risk rather than seeing us as, this is a potential partner. We can accomplish our goals faster and with greater momentum if we bring them along. So how do we shift that? So I think there are conversations that youth initiative and youth leaders, we should create a good opportunity. Maybe this is already happening. Maybe this has happened, to listen. Why are they seeing youth-led initiatives as maybe an institution they cannot trust? Secondly, I think the GRA as well, we having an accountability mechanism in place. It's one of the things that the We Trust Youth initiative wants to do in the phase 2, to have like a movement of youth-led organizations, as well as organizations, donors, and INGOs that will sign up to work together and resolve this issue of trust. Because how are there organizations before, youth-led organizations before, that have mismanaged funds? Even if they are, it will not be the first time. Even non-youth-led organizations, they have also mismanaged funds before. Why is it that the narrative can be persisting, seeing that, okay, youth-led organizations cannot manage big funds? And so the We Trust Youth initiative might want to bring in these two parties together and have the conversation and build an accountability mechanism where non-youth-led organizations are also provided support, and their capacity, they need capacity building on how to come on board. It's just like when you have a relationship with someone, and if you don't trust them, there is no way you can build a relationship. So maybe you need help. And so just like adults, we go for help, maybe for our relationships, well-established organizations need their capacity to be built around trusting youth-led organizations. And I think maybe this is something that we can do, but I'm eager to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Thank you for that. Do any of our other panelists have reactions or thoughts around building trust and what role the GRA plays in that?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jackie, for those reflections. I totally agree with you. I think that is also linked to the power shifting discussions that we are also having. Not only applies to youth organizations, but also applies to Global South organizations as well. Where it comes to power, we know that the funding comes from the North most of the time. And then small organizations in the South, whether they are youth-led or non-youth-led, they often face this lack of trust from funders, from big NGOs. So I think that is always important to think about these decolonization discussions that we're having, the power shifting discussions that we're having, and how this all links to something that is more tangible, like trusting and being aware of the power that youth organizations can take in the field. Besides that, I think that also it's a matter of building a case, an investment case of why youth organizations have a pivotal role in moving the field of SRHR forward. I think that there's also, we have to be realistic that within the youth organizations space, there's a lack of alignment as well when it comes to presenting together as a united front when it comes to indicators, metrics, because if we're all measuring things in a similar way, we could be building something that is stronger for funders to see, yes, this is the value, these are the facts, these are the activities that they have conducted. So I think that having a unified measurement framework is also something very important. And I think that the GRA is also a place where we can align, because the number of organizations that are part of it, which I think is over 40, we have experience in different fields, very technical work, very local work, advocacy at the high level, UN stuff and those kind of things. So I think that we do bring a lot of expertise from different fields within the SRHR space, of course, but we could be building something together that is a measurement framework where we can united build the investment case, because in the end, yeah, everything is an investment, everything comes to funding, everything comes to how resources are allocated, and limited resources are allocated within knowing that limited is an important word of the discussion. So yeah, I think that that's also something that we can do better.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to Della with Population Council and Girl Center and the emphasis around innovation, measurement, and data. I'm curious if you have any reactions or thoughts to David's proposal around making the investment case for youth-led organizations, especially around a common set of measurements and metrics that we can use.
Yeah, no, David hit it right on the nail there. And I think that's I mean, that in terms of trusting, not just the tangible trust, what that looks like from within, which is coming together and having that unified front, but also sort of, I don't want to use the word quantify, but to put it in a way that it shows that progression, that not only are you unified as a group, I mean, not to say that you can't have differences of how to present, but what does the future look like? What do we want to say we're going to measure between now and, I don't know, 15, 20 years from now? Because I think even in the discussion, the UNFPA person mentioned about turnover, right? So 15, 20 years from now, it's all 10, maybe 5 years from now, it's a different group of people, but we must have that same, when I say the same, I don't mean to say it can't change, but you have to have that vision going in a certain direction. And what are we constantly measuring so that we can speak the same language, particularly whether it's to funding or anyone who's willing to be a part of the group. And so I think for the Girl Center, it gives us a certain charge to think about how we can bring together some of these organizations that are working to maybe even begin the discussions about what do those indicators look like? What do those measures look like? How can they be collected how differently, let me say, can they be collected? Because we have a lot of data that are, in shells and online and all that. Maybe there's a different way of collecting them. Maybe some of these indicators don't mean much. Maybe there's a conversation to be had about what else needs to be, turned into an indicator or measure. So I think it's a very great point to make. And that trust building. I mean, I think all of you all have attended, these trust building sessions where, you fall back and then somebody's supposed to hold you and make sure that you don't fall. And that's the work. That's the work that we as the Girl Center could be doing, to be able to say, listen, bringing the people together, but sort of creating that platform so that when you do fall, that when you do lean back, that there's something holding you, so that you can be able to really sort of have that as the foundation. So I'll take this back to the Girl Center and see if we can begin those discussions and see how well we can come together. Thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Innocent. See you on mute.
I was trying to think around the first discussion, and my fellow speakers were talking on the possible ways to build that trust back. And I was just trying to think some of the practical experience when I go to the communities and when I see that trust is being lost. And then when you ask the communities what went wrong when working with these partners, why do you hate them? And I think the responses that may be falling into these 3 Ps. So the first one is power and purpose and partnership. So coming back to power, one thing that I've learned for some time is we as implementers of we as partners and implementers of programs within our communities, global health programs within our communities, have the power when you go to the communities. So we normally have the power over the communities. And when you have the power, there is a very thin line between using that power for good or using your power to abuse the communities or to disrespect the communities. And sometimes the abuse of power sounds simple as not being able to respond to some critical safeguarding issues that can happen when implementing a program within a community. That also could be an abuse of power. So I think we need to get back to start acknowledging the power that we have, acknowledging that the power that the donors have, acknowledging the power that the communities have, and being careful in terms of how to use your power for good within your own community. And I think that's possible. We could also start gaining back the trust. Coming on the second piece, which is also coming from the power, is about purpose. If we lose trust within the communities, then we have to question our purpose and the work that we do. I love one of the discussion we had during the family planning conference. I think the vice president of programs from Gender Health mentioned, if the donors don't want what the community wants, then we have to question the purpose of the donors as well. If we implementers, don't want to agree with what the community needs, what are the community needs, then we also have to question our purpose as well. So what is our purpose as we are having this discussion, as we are building the GRA, and what are the community needs? I think as we start questioning these, we start taking these questions up, then may help us in doing some meaningful work within the communities. And the last piece about partnership is, who have we partnered with before, and what has been the impact in terms of building that trust or winning that trust? And did we exclude some groups purposeful, and maybe those are quite influential when implementing our work? I think sometimes we tend to talk among ourselves, and we don't talk to the other group which do not align with our own values. And the fact that we leave them, sometimes they have quite a bigger influence within their communities, and they tend to leverage their influence in terms of breaking the trust that we have within our communities. So it's a tough, I think these are tough questions to ask among ourselves, and approaches to take, thinking about the power we have, thinking about the purpose we have and how it matches with the community needs, community sexual and reproductive health needs, and thinking about what are the possible partnership pathways that have also been stipulated, within the GRA, and who are the partners to involve. And sometimes I think we should even be able to have what they so-called uncomfortable partnerships. At the end of the day, it's what do we want to achieve? And I think, maybe that could start helping shifting the art of trust and making the community to trust the work that you're doing. And the other practical experience that I also want to add is coming back maybe to the point of power is when we go to the community, sometimes we tend to miss. I could be in Tanzania, but I could be a foreigner in one of the community in Tanzania. I'm going to implement a program in the Southern Highlands of Tanzania. They don't know me. I'm from Dar es Salaam, from other region. And when I go with ideas, with everything that we want to do within those communities, without acknowledging there are also young leaders who are maybe just like innocent within that community, have a strong trust within that community, and acknowledging their power and being able to work with them together and in implementing the work that we are doing within that community. I think sometimes we miss that, and it tends to break the trust between the community and us foreigners within our own countries, within some new communities in the country. If that's a better way to put it. But these are just some kinds of the points that are coming up in mind. Also, agreeing with all the points that my colleagues have mentioned.
Wonderful, thank you. And you talk about partnerships, and it sounds like there might be a partnership or collaboration that makes sense between Girl Center and the GRA, and looking at starting to figure out how to create those trust building platforms. I want to make sure we get to some of the questions that are asked by our audience. So I'm going to move this along, even though I feel like we could spend a while in that conversation. But going to some of the Q&A, starting with Solomon. The question is, how do we make our governments and policymakers accept that it's beneficial for youth to be taught sexual education and provided family planning methods at whatever age, as long as they request it? Because in Kenya, we are burying our heads in the sand. Youth are sexually active, and we need to face it and deal with it now. So let's take one. We'll do one answer for each of them because we have to get through all of them. But anyone want to take that question? Around engaging policymakers and governments and looking at the Roadmap for Action has those progressive AYSRHR policies. So any experience with that?
I want to try, but I'm not sure if I'm a very good example from my side. Maybe I'm not a very good example, but I think one of the ways that we don't have very good outcome at the moment, but looks like it's promising, the way that we work with the decision makers at the country level in Tanzania. So for instance, is occupying the space, so knowing what are the possible spaces to get in, and then forcibly sometimes occupying those spaces. So for instance, in Tanzania, you have platforms such as the National Family Planning Technical Working Group, where most of the decisions, strategies, and policies are sometimes being discussed there before final decisions have been made. And normally the decisions coming from these technical working groups, they normally have a lot of influence in terms of becoming the final decisions. So we were never like approached by people from the Ministry of Health coming to knock at Young and Alive gate saying, hey, you have to attend this technical working group. But we had to forcefully been there. At first they thought like, what are these guys doing here? But we spoke what matters, and I think continue doing that and showcasing them and telling them the value of the work that we do within our communities helps them to understand somehow. It might take time, but again, at least we got to do it. But sometimes there is a tendency of being being denied. They deny the facts for the purpose of denying. But I think as our role is just to keep pushing and keep telling them in those possible platforms. I'll give it to David to also respond to this one.
Yeah, just to quickly add on this, I think that just linking with the conversation that we had with Dr. Sam and Danielle, governments have also made commitments to certain things, for example, EP 2030, ICPD, and so on. So I think that if we can also make them accountable for these sort of commitments as civil society, that's also something that we can do. Reminding them, hey, you signed up for this, and it's not something that you just do for the sake of doing it, but you actually have to make an implementation plan, and it might not be perfect. Like I know that there's a lot of conservative movement rising right now across the world, so we might have to choose our battles when it comes to these topics. But I think that at least using some of this language, that when it comes to UN resolutions, when it comes to civil society commitments and so on, I think that is something that we can at least aim to do as a civil society, to push a little bit on more progressive approaches when it comes to CSE, abortion, LGBTQI, and so on.
And that actually relates to the next question in the chat from Daluma, around the shrinking democratic spaces that Dr. Samu talked about. And so the question is, how do we go around the reduced democratic spaces that are happening in so many countries? So I don't know if anyone wants to add on or build upon Innocent and David's responses to that.
Hi, Jordan. Yeah, I'm happy to come in here. I think that there's the human tendency of the pendulum effect, when we swing from one extreme to the other. And when David said we should choose our battles carefully, I think that's what maybe within this space we need to be thinking about, to think about the overall goal that we want to achieve, and think about our methods, and know that the language we use and our framing and how we choose to show up at times can go a very long way to impact what we are able to achieve at the end of the day. I feel that if we continue to live in a society where everybody's on one another's neck, and you're like, no, it's my way or nothing else, and this person says, no, it's my way or nothing else, and then we'll find ourselves swinging from this extreme to the other. It just takes who is currently in the position of power. When the person is in the position of power, we use their current opportunity to enforce what their views are. But maybe it's time for us to ask, what does it take to live in a society where we are taking into consideration everybody's views, and we're trying to bring everybody along, and not have a system or a language that is us against them approach? Because it seems if we keep doing this way, then we keep swinging from one end to the other. But I know that this is going to be difficult, because this is the first time. We don't necessarily have precedence of this, and what will it take? But I feel that on a daily basis is something that I ask myself, what does it mean, and how do I take into consideration other people's views and their cultures and how they want things done? If I have to go into a community, let's say in Niger, and I want to implement a program there, and what will my approach be? Innocent, you did mention something that it's high time that we begin to ask donors, is donor funding aligned to what communities want, or do donors have just what they think that this is the most critical problem in this community or in the world now, and anybody who gets our funding must be solving this problem? So if we keep having things that are really not aligned, and everybody has what they want to achieve, and they just want to achieve that without paying attention to what is happening around them, to what people are saying, then there's little that we might not achieve good results. So I know that I've not provided any best way forward, like this is step 1, step 2, step 3, but I think that we should start having these conversations and asking ourselves and making this, Innocent, you also said these partnerships that are not very comfortable. Maybe how do we relate with people who don't speak the language that we speak, and what would that look like? Yeah.
Thank you.
Just want to
Okay,
jump quickly on that. Jordan, I think the shrink of democratic spaces is identified as mentioned by Dr. Dube, and the way we see it and now is so normally when I speak to my fellow young people, which I believe a big part of the audience today is also young people, is people in power are just using an approach of divide and conquer to divide us and to conquer us, and sometimes when they start using human rights agendas to divide us, then as young people, we need to be cautious, especially when they start, I know to my colleagues in Tanzania, they're now talking about LGBT rights. They're going to come to you tomorrow if you celebrate when they talk about this. They will divide us for this, but tomorrow they'll come and divide us for women's rights. Tomorrow they'll come and divide us for children's rights. So as young people, one of the ways to start fighting back the shrink of democratic spaces, we have to be very, very careful on what politicians are using in dividing us, and especially when they are using human rights, issues which are quite humane and sensitive to human beings to divide us. I think we have to reject that instead of celebrating that, even when we do not agree with whatever they're saying. But as long as it's a human rights issue, then one of the ways is being sure to be cautious of that and not to go for that, and emphasizing on the human rights frameworks in terms of fighting back the shrink of democratic spaces.
Lovely, thank you. I know we have more questions in the chat, but I also know we are at time. So I apologize that we did not get to all the questions, but I think the conversation we were able to have both in the pre-recorded conversation as well as the live was very insightful and starts to unearth some of the things that we haven't talked about or we haven't named or haven't begun to figure out solutions for. So I hope this is just an initial conversation. We hope to continue to have these conversations. Please, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for joining us, so the Global Roadmap for Action group for being part of the conversation with UNFPA and FP 2030, as well as here today. I'd like to thank UNFPA, FP 2030, and Girl Center from Population Council for joining us in the conversations and committing to not only the Roadmap for Action, but advancing AYSRHR in partnership with youth. So as I said, I encourage us to stay engaged and to continue these conversations and translate our conversations into actions and partnerships. I invite you to check out the Global Roadmap for Action website, and we'll send out links to that after recording, as well as the recording of this session today. And I thank everyone for their time and questions and participation in today's conversation. And happy World Contraception Day. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jordan, and thanks everyone.